We are now about a third of the way into the fantasy football season, which means you've figured out by now how good your fantasy team is, and especially how good your early picks were. At this point, we've figured out who the busts were, but what I want to do in this video is try and figure out some of those major busts, which of them could still come good. Now, we're not going to be talking about players who have suffered from injuries here, so there's no could Malik Neighbour still come good. Even talking about quarterbacks like Lamar Jackson and Jaden Daniels, I'm not considering them busts if they've missed time. But what I am going to be doing is looking at 7 highly drafted players who have been really disappointing this season and letting you know if they could still come good. If you like content like this, please consider liking and subscribing. But let's get into it with the first player, and it is the big dog himself, Derrick Henry. Now, Derrick Henry was drafted as the RB5 this last year, going towards the back of the first round, maybe the beginning of the second if you were slightly lucky. Obviously, it was a huge year last year for Derrick Henry in Baltimore, and we saw no reason why the same wouldn't continue to happen. Derrick Henry also should be able to still thrive without Lamar Jackson in this offense, because obviously in theory he doesn't catch a huge amount of passes, so it shouldn't matter a huge amount whether the quarterback is in place. And Lamar has only missed one game. This Ravens offense has just been relatively disappointing, although mainly the defense has been disappointing. The offense has still been able to score points, but Derrick Henry just hasn't really been a part of it. Derrick Henry is currently in half PPR the running back 19, and one of the most concerning things about him is in week 1, Derrick Henry finished as the running back 1 on the week with 169 rushing yards. Since week 1, he has totaled 148 rushing yards and hasn't finished as a top 20 back one time. So what's the verdict on Derrick Henry? What's going to happen from here? I think Derrick Henry has always been a game script relevant player, or game script reliant player. Because he doesn't catch passes, he is always someone that thrives more in a good offense when the team is winning. And actually, Derrick Henry is struggling more because of how bad the defense is than because of any offensive struggles. Because the Ravens are constantly in shootouts because of how terrible that defense has been, it means that Derrick Henry is being taken off the field for third downs, particularly for game-winning drives and for 2-minute drills as well, when Justice Hill tends to see the field. This means that his upside is just not quite there. We can all think of Derrick Henry games, particularly in Tennessee, where the first half he's been sort of alright, maybe 40-50 yards. Second half, particularly fourth quarter, rips an 80-yard touchdown against a tired defense, but he's just not getting the chance to do that. Derrick Henry, I think, deserves a downgrade in your rankings, and yeah, there's still a chance that he could come good this season, but it is going to revolve around that offense absolutely exploding to make up for quite how terrible that defense is right now. Brian Thomas Jr., as we know, is one of the biggest busts of the fantasy football season and was drafted as the wide receiver 8, but currently in half PPR is the wide receiver 37. One of the most difficult things about BTJ this season is that he basically hasn't had a startable week. When you take a look through his game log, he hasn't really had a week where he's actually produced for your fantasy team. Yes, there's been multiple weeks where he's not really let you down, but for someone who would have potentially needed to be your first round pick, you want week winning upside, not just someone who maybe is going to get you 10 to 12 points, which has been the only upside of Brian Thomas Jr. this season. I was recently watching Matt Harmon on Fantasy Life's YouTube channel, and I really recommend checking it out, where he talks through watching game film for a bunch of different receivers to try and figure out whether to trust them in fantasy football right now. And his reflections match some of what I'd been seeing with Brian Thomas Jr. this season, and it's that the usage is completely different from last year. When we took a look at Liam Cohen coming over from Tampa Bay, and we took a look at Brian Thomas, and we went, well, that's your Chris Godwin. And Chris Godwin absolutely feasts out of the slot. You think we can move Brian Thomas Jr. inside, we can get him some of that yards after the catch that the Bucs offense really thrived on, and then he'll be able to be an elite, especially PPR, an elite asset. But what actually happened, obviously they drafted Travis Hunter, who has now been moved in for some of those slightly easier routes out of the slot, which means Brian Thomas Jr. is playing the Mike Evans role. And yes, Brian Thomas Jr. can function as an X, but not really the skills of his game. It's not really the way in which he thrives and the way in which he likes to win. It means he has been throwing a lot of 50-50 balls, which if you're Mike Evans is completely fine. You can turn those 50-50 balls into more 65-35. If you're Brian Thomas Jr. and if you're in your head about catching, it's just not going to happen in the same way. And he's just running as a true alpha X wide receiver. But Mike Evans might be the prototypical X in the NFL right now. And Brian Thomas Jr. is just not that. For it to work with him, that usage needs to be changed, because currently you can see how in his head he is with catching the ball. And if you're just throwing him 50-50 routes, if you're just throwing him, into man coverage, into press man coverage, beat this one player on the outside, maybe you can have a late in breaking route, but it's still very much going to be, true alpha receiver workload. You're just not going to be able to catch consistently, and we've seen that compared to his target volume and his catch rate, which is incredibly, incredibly low. Brian Thomas Jr. needs to get out of the yips if he is going to succeed in fantasy football right now. I think you have to hold him because I don't think anyone is going to trade for Brian Thomas right now, but I don't think it's going to happen this year, and I don't think there is any path that means we can not see him as a bust the rest of this season. Chase Brown was drafted as the running back 11, but is currently the running back 37, and so far this season hasn't had a single performance inside the top 20 running back. Now in PPR, that is slightly different. In week 5, he did have 8 receptions in a blowout loss, which obviously makes him a borderline startable asset, but Chase Brown has just not been what you've wanted him to be. Now obviously, a huge part of that is due to Joe Burrow going down. We're going to talk about Ja'Marr Chase a little bit later, spoilers. And obviously the offense as a whole has struggled when your elite quarterback goes down. That's going to make a huge difference. The difficulty with Chase Brown is that the offensive line has also struggled, and he's just not really showing the same explosivity that he did last year. He has managed to hold on to pretty much all of the workload. So the interesting thing with Chase Brown is, does Joe Flacco coming in manage to make a difference for him? And I think it should actually. Having a completely immobile quarterback will make a difference with those checkdowns, and I think Chase Brown will still see the volume he's been seeing so far, maybe even a slight uptick, because Jake Browning obviously way more mobile than Joe Flacco, not saying a huge amount. I don't think the upside of the RB11 where he was drafted is really going to be there for Chase Brown this season, because as much as Joe Flacco is probably a better starting option than Jake Browning, I don't think he's going to propel them to the same elite upside that we were going to see previously, and the offense just isn't functioning right now. So yeah, I think you can hold him. He might become startable, which he's not been so far, but I don't think it's going to be the same upside that you'd seen previously. If you're enjoying this video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Drop a comment down below and click that subscribe button so you can get involved in everything coming from this channel, whether it's my weekly waiver wire video, whether it's my weekly dynasty trades, or whether it's my off the wire series where I'm rebuilding a dynasty team that started with no players and is built off the waiver wire. Get involved, click subscribe, and drop a comment down below. Going from one Bengal to the other, and it's fascinating considering Ja'Marr Chase was drafted at 101 overall, and obviously as the wide receiver 1, that we're not really talking about him as one of the biggest busts of the season, and he's obviously featuring quite late on in the video. Ja'Marr Chase is currently the wide receiver 12, and I think it's proof that Ja'Marr Chase is maybe the most quarterback-proof wide receiver in the NFL. Obviously playing with Jake Browning, but when you take a look at his game log, he still had those blow-up weeks. He was elite last week, even though the Bengals were blown out in a loss. Ja'Marr Chase is going to thrive with Joe Flacco, but the main thing with Chase is that he is so good, and he's so good at finding yards after the catch for himself, that I don't think it really matters who his quarterback is. I think so long as he has someone that can get him the ball, and Joe Flacco can do so much better than Jake Browning was able to, I think he is going to still be a wide receiver 1. Now, yes, he is a bust because he's not going to finish as the wide receiver 1 overall. That was never going to happen the moment Joe Burrow went out, just because the offense was going to get worse. But Joe Flacco, we've seen him propel Jerry Jeudy to new heights. We've seen him really work with those wide receivers in Indianapolis as well. We've seen what he can do. And I think there is a world in which he is going to propel Ja'Marr Chase back up to being a consistent every week wide receiver one with those huge blow-up games, but not quite challenging to the same level as the overall wide receiver one, if that makes sense. I think Joe Flacco coming in is going to be a huge uptick in consistency for both T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, but obviously Joe Flacco is not Joe Burrow. At the quarterback position, it was interesting trying to find a bust, because obviously you've had a few quarterbacks at the top go down with injury, Lamar Jackson and Jayden Daniels, so I didn't really want to focus on them, even though they have been a little bit disappointing compared to what they could be. Bo Nix has also been disappointing, but actually currently is, we drafted QB8 and is currently the QB12. The biggest bust for me is Kyler Murray, drafted as the QB9 and currently standing as the quarterback 17. And this Cardinals offense just has not looked right. Everything has looked incredibly out of sync. Whether it be in particular that connection between Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison Jr., or whether it just be the way in which the Cardinals offense is able to move down the field. This is primarily a rushing offense, and that is a crucial thing for Kyler Murray. Last year, he finished as the quarterback 10, and I wanted to have a look through and say, okay, well, was he rushing entirely differently? Because I noticed he was only really having 5 to 6 rushing attempts per game this season. And actually last year, it was pretty much identical. It was pretty much identically the same amount of rushing that he was having this season. He was just passing for a much higher volume and passing on average for higher passing touchdowns. The offense just is not working for Kyler right now. He's not had a single top 10 finish in fantasy football yet this season, and is basically an unstartable asset if you are looking for an elite upside. Now, yes, Kyler does have a relatively safe floor because he does average about 30 to 40 rushing yards a game, so adding in 200 passing yards on top of that and maybe a touchdown, he's going to be fine. He's going to be a mid-range QB2. But when you drafted him at quarterback 9, you thought this was someone with elite upside, and Kyler Murray just does not have that right now. Kyler is kind of someone I'm not looking to start, I'm looking to move off of, and that includes in Dynasty Leagues as well, because I don't think the future for Kyler has the same elite upside that we thought it did a couple of years ago. Lad McConkey has been another massive bust, and this is a fascinating one to me. I've spoken about him in a Dynasty Trades video. I wrote him up for DLF a couple of weeks ago, where I wrote up pretty similar to this, the wide receiver busts so far. Should you trust them or not? Lad McConkey was drafted as the wide receiver 11, and he's currently the wide receiver 47. Now, when I looked into him a couple of weeks ago, I saw that he still had the joint highest targets on the Chargers, and he still had by far the highest catchable, by far the highest catch rate. The mad thing about this is that the Chargers are one of the most pass-happy teams in the NFL. Now, some of that is going to coincide with running backs going down, but in neutral pass rate, they are third in the NFL right now, which you wouldn't have anticipated with the Chargers beforehand. And Justin Herbert is truly playing MVP-level quarterback right now. The issue with Lad McConkey is since I did that, he has truly dropped off in terms of targets. He's currently 10 targets behind Keenan Allen and 7 behind Quentin Johnston. Now, he did finish as the wide receiver 21 in week 5, but that was mostly a touchdown. I still think that Lad McConkey is the most talented player on this team, or most talented wide receiver on this team, but clearly the Chargers don't agree right now, because Keenan Allen is getting open at will and being targeted at an insane rate, and even Quentin Johnston, who is having his breakout season, is seeing far higher target volume than Lad McConkey. I'm sorry to say this, but I think it might be over for him in 2025. Closing off with someone I was really excited about in the offseason, and one of my favourite rookies, one of my guys, RJ Harvey. Now, RJ Harvey hasn't been a huge bust so far this season. He was drafted as the running back 21 and is currently the running back 39. Obviously, that's disappointing, and the key thing for Harvey is that the hype train was rolling completely out of control on him. The problem is they then signed J.K. Dobbins, so his ADP started to settle down a little bit, and J.K. Dobbins was clearly signed to be the starter. He has been the starter in this offense since week 1, and Harvey has been mixing in on some third downs, showing some of that ability to catch the ball as well, but not really been a relevant part of this offense. The offense has been quite stagnant as well. I would anticipate for Harvey that he probably sees way more work after the bye, or potentially if J.K. Dobbins gets injured, which he has in basically every season of his career to date so far. If you look at some of the underlying metrics for Harvey, I know it's on limited workload, but he has the highest average yards after contact in the NFL of any running back, and some of the other underlying metrics look pretty good as well. Harvey is someone I'm definitely holding on to, but please be aware, you cannot start him just yet. But I do think with Harvey, that breakout is going to come relatively soon.